everybody from whenever, wherever you may be listening, watching. This is The Yard Sign, Florida's most influential podcast. We appreciate you joining us. Johnny Torres with you with a very special episode today. As you know, I've always seen The Yard Sign in kind of an evolutionary process. For those of you who've been following us now for, I think we've been doing this podcast about 5 years. It is, it's always changing. We used to have about 4, 5, 6 people in the room, and now, we have kind of a cycle of guest hosts and guests and so it's always changing and continues to change. And one of the things I've wanted to do for a long time is to profile the candidates that are running, not only here in the Tampa Bay area where we're based out of, but also throughout the state of Florida. And so just be following all of our platforms so that you can stay up to date with all the candidates that are running in your area and across the state. And we hope to bring you some engaging and informative conversations. Today, of course, being no different. I'm excited to have first time in this studio as really one of our candidate profiles is Rico Smith. And Rico is running for Hillsborough County Commission, District 6, and that's a county-wide seat. And hello, Rico.
Hey, thank you, Johnny. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much for being here. It's exciting to have you in the room. It's been exciting to watch you kind of, really come out from just being a Tampa Bay resident, to now just being all over the place. You're coming off a bit of an honored, as an honored guest, I believe, of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Is that right?
Yes.
Coming off of Veterans Day. Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your support. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, born and raised here in Tampa, and we really have been building up the foundation, the groundwork over the past, few years, because networking is power.
Sure.
And, I thought it was inevitable that I would one day run for office, but didn't really know where we would start, where we would have the biggest impact in the community.
Yeah.
And, we seen fit that, hey, Hillsborough County Commission, county-wide seat in 24 was where we're going to really plant the stake and take it from there.
Well, and that really excites me because oftentimes the average person mostly pays attention to national issues. And it's I think, natural inclination, just because of our general knowledge, to say, oh, well, I'm going to run for Congress, or I'm going to run for Senate, or and first, most people have no idea what they're getting into when they go to run for an office like that. Second of all, that's a very small pool in the overall scheme of things. That's like saying, oh, I'm going to go be in the NFL. The amount of people that actually get that opportunity is incredibly small. Not realizing that there's an easier way, right? There's kind of a side door, which is local politics, where you can even have a bigger impact than you ever could in Congress. So it excites me when we have new faces that, again, have a passion for this community and want to make an impact and understand the value of starting at the local level and really making a difference here, and then learning your ropes, and then from there, who knows, right?
That's right. It's really making the impact in the local community, and from there, being that I'm born and raised here, I know the community. I've seen the community grow exponentially, throughout my lifetime here.
I bet.
Being able to know those issues and then champion those issues, right, at the highest level locally to make an impact, right? The one thing I love to mention is that I'm 27 years old, and one day I will raise a family here. I've lived here, I've grown here, and I worked here. And
you're invested.
I'm invested, and I have skin in the game.
Yeah.
So anything that I implement, I legislate on here at the county level, I'm going to bear witness to.
Sure.
5, 10, 15 years from now.
Yeah. And you'll be, again, you'll reap the benefits, and you'll also, be experiencing the consequences. Right. I think as most people, I think, the question you probably always get, and you even said, like, you've had this idea in your mind for some time to run for office. So what drove that? What sparked that desire? Because that, of course, it's not like saying, hey, I want to be a fireman when I grow up. It's not, what drove that desire to say, hey, I want to make an impact on my community, and someday I want to run for office?
Well, I love to reflect back on my childhood. I was raised here. My grandparents, actually raised me. My parents were pretty young when they had me, and if it wasn't for my grandparents, I give them, the due glory and honor, because I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them.
Wow.
And so as growing up, and I remember watching, the inauguration in 2009 of Obama, and I thought, wow, okay, hope and change, right? Mm-hmm. And then you fast forward, never did come to my community, my household, right? And so when I fast forward, I thought, well, hey, how do we bridge the gap between ourselves and our elected officials, right? Where do we start? And I always look back at the root of, empty, failed promises, time and time again from our elected officials. And so, when I went off, I graduated from high school, joined the military, enlisted in the Air Force, did my 6.5 years enlisted, and then just commissioned last year as a finance officer at MacDill.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And that's when I really begun to really look at the community as a whole. And so the passion really grew from looking at my childhood experiences of, okay, I want to be able to make impact and change, something greater than myself. And then earlier this year, I helped out Blake Casper, who ran for city council here.
Absolutely.
In Tampa, District 4.
And for those who don't know, who may not be from here, or maybe just not know, so the Casper family, I believe until recently, owned all of the McDonald's in the region. And they have since, I believe, sold their franchises. Yes. But also own, the Oxford Exchange. And I'm forgetting the new property over on Bayshore.
The
Stovall House, right? And library. But these, again, talking about investing in the community. These people have changed hundreds, if not thousands, of lives through their investments in our community, through business, right? Yes, and they continue. And a lot of people don't see what the Caspers do behind the scenes, in terms of helping candidates, their philanthropical, donations and efforts. But yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, deeply rooted in the community. They are, and the entire family is just incredible. And so, helping out Blake with his campaign, we sat down afterwards and said, maybe you should run for office, right? Maybe it shouldn't be me. And I've heard that, because I really got involved in politics back in 2020 with Congressman Bilirakis.
Oh, wonderful!
And for many who may not know him, he's a congressman for the 12th congressional district,
right?
And that
kind of the northern part of Tampa Bay,
Pasco, Citrus, Hernando counties. And so I remember meeting him in D.C. and he was
huge advocate for veterans,
stand-up guy. His father was also a congressman, but he really took me under his wing and said, "Hey, I see something in you. I want to help mold you, into a, already being a respectable young man, but then now to be able to help you network."
Well, and I want to point out something about what you're bringing to the table right now, because I like to take a very different approach. I don't want to just talk about your campaign. I also want to educate people out there that may be thinking about running at some point, or taking some part in the political process, which is you've done your homework. And I think oftentimes there's some phenomenal people out there that have run for office that don't do their homework, and they don't spend their time on other people's campaign. They don't spend their time talking to successful candidates, talking to failed candidates. And I don't mean failed candidates in a negative light. Again, there's, what we now know is failing upward. These are people that, again, you're now learning firsthand as a candidate the commitment that it takes to your time and your resources, including your financial resources, to run for office. It's a huge commitment, and it's also not always pretty. Not everybody you meet is going to like you and have nice things to say and be all gung ho about your candidacy. And so, all that to say is that I appreciate you taking the time to before jumping into running for office, that again you did your diligence in aligning yourself with some incredible people.
Thank you so much. Yeah, in a campaign, before you just go ahead in, a lot of people just love to go ahead in. But it's really about canvassing, surveying the landscape, seeing where you can best make an impact. and the greatest impact. And so with me, going back to, the Bill Araka's story, being really taken under his wing and under his mentorship back in, the summer of 2020, in the middle of COVID. From there, it was the door knocking, it was the fundraising, it was experiencing and looking at a successful candidate, and then throughout that, meeting other people who had ran and maybe have failed, or wanted to serve and through a different capacity in the community.
Well, we've seen now. I know that you've met Bernie Jacques, and Bernie is also an incredible story because, again, he's been a friend for a long time, but he's an attorney. He's always had his heart, for service. He's, I believe, part of the Big Brothers Big Sisters organization, and done amazing work there. But he ran, I think it was 3 times, and was not successful until the final time. And it goes back to that determination and having your heart be in the right place. Because again, people forget, like Lincoln, ran for office many times and failed. And then it's kind of a cliche example. But again, we have an example in Bernie Jacques that, not to get too much into what he went through, but the tide was very much against him. It was not an easy trot for him on either side of the aisle, really, to get elected, but he was determined and he did the work. Like you said, he did the things that a lot of candidates don't realize they have to do. And until they've gotten into the campaign mode, and then they realize, oh my gosh, I don't want to do any of this, because it's not, you're not going to enjoy every aspect of it.
That's right.
There's people who don't like fundraising. There's people who don't like canvassing. There's people who don't like making phone calls. And guess what? You got to do all of that, and then some. And
it's so arduous because it's such a big time commitment. And having a full-time job, having wife, kids, family. Oh my gosh!
Right.
You just add it all up. And so back to your point about Bernie Jacques, and we'll close it out. Is that being able, he's proved himself tremendously. I mean, he prevailed and had perseverance, and that's what it takes to be a successful candidate, right?
And has now had a successful first session.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
So that's what it really comes down to. People don't realize, and one thing I've heard, over the past few weeks is, oh, you're so lucky to have the opportunity. It's not about luck. People don't see the hard work, the endless nights. I mean, I'll have 20-hour days sometimes. And it's the what you give up, because you give a piece of yourself, a big piece of yourself, out to the community, out to others. And, and it's always about campaigns, right? You have landmines, you have fires you got to put out daily.
And that you're exposing yourself in a very different way, and we don't have to, because it's irrelevant unless you want to bring up maybe some sort of example. But once people learn of your politics, and certainly even more so once you become a candidate and you approach them, people that you thought were friends, maybe even some family members, and not everybody's going to be on board, not everybody's going to be supportive, but you do find out who your friends are, who your support is.
In a heartbeat. I mean, not everyone's Team Rico, right?
Right.
And then you have people who you didn't think were Team Rico, and they'll come out and go, oh my God, we were your champion the whole time. Well, where were you? So you really have to be cognizant, of your surroundings, who are friends, who are foes. And so, one thing that this has been very eye-opening for me is you see the time commitment, you see, what you have to give up. It's really a selfless servitude. You have to be willing to give out more of yourself than you take in, giving more than what you receive. And it's a lot of people, unfortunately, I think now is that we've seen elected officials time and time again, these career politicians, and it is, now there's a bad stigma around politics, right, as we know, and it's really taking someone who's a grassroots, someone who's deeply cares about the community, and is not in it for themselves. And that's why I'm running now. When I, back to finish off my point earlier about Blake Casper, after hearing and sitting down with him, and a few weeks right after that, I met with Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna.
Oh, wow.
Who's our congresswoman over in Pinellas.
Again, another candidate who was not successful initially.
Yeah.
But came back fighting and stronger. And again, I think for a lot of candidates, you need to have that learning curve. Yes. There needs to be that first try.
Yes.
And that's also why I recommend to a lot of, especially younger candidates, hey, go for city council, go for county commission. And it's not that I don't believe in them for that they can achieve higher office. It's that I know there's that learning curve. You have to learn how many phone calls you have to make to fundraise, how many doors you have to knock to, even put up a respectable showing in the polls on election day, and the true commitment that it takes. Again, to your time and your resources, and to your network, to run for office.
That's right.
And so, again, some of the strongest people, Jackie Toledo is another example. She's not currently in office, but she wasn't successful her first time around. And she kind of went doubled down because she initially ran for city council and then ran for state representative, so she's she went for a harder office to secure and ended up being incredibly successful and had, I think, she termed out of office, but very successfully, and left Tallahassee as one of the strongest fundraisers that they'd seen. But again, it's a process that very few people truly understand or know until you've actually been there.
That's right. Again, it's about the perseverance.
Yeah.
And so after meeting with Congresswoman Luna, she said, hey, well, have you thought about running for office? Yeah. Well, yes, I have. Well, if you do, you would have my support. And so after that, I said, okay, well, I've heard this now twice.
Yeah.
And when a few weeks after that, I'm back in Tampa, and word had gotten to me that Mariella Smith, who is now my Democrat opponent, was going to run for office. She had the intent to file. And I said, all right, this is someone who stood behind the mask mandates, the COVID lockdown restrictions, the 9 p.m. curfew, so that we can't have that, desperately hurt small businesses.
The school lockdowns. Right? Now we've learned, how devastating those school lockdowns were.
We see the effects of that now, 3-4 years later, and what it's had on childhood development, right? Yeah. And so I said, we cannot allow that to come back into the county commission.
Well, let me go back to something that you kind of opened up with, because I see it, and I don't think people really see it as much as they should. You having been born and raised here. I've lived, both in the eastern part of the county, where I do now, and in the western part of the county. I lived for a period out in Town and Country. And as exciting as it has been to see the growth and the change that Tampa has had, that now we are literally on the map nationally, internationally. It's amazing. It's incredible, right? But to touch on something you said, as someone who's grown up here, there are neighborhoods that haven't changed in 60 years. There are neighborhoods that have not felt that impact. And even those that, have unfortunately gone through, let's say, gentrification, again, those adversely affect the people that need the help the most, right? And so really, where do you find your focus being? Where it's I always say that, the first campaign I ever worked on, he was passionate about autism, and he wanted to go to Tallahassee to implement legislation about autism. What is that driving kind of impact that you want to have? Where do you start? As Rico Smith, Hillsborough County Commissioner.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you for mentioning my background on that. So I grew up in East Tampa. East Tampa is predominantly black community. Lower socioeconomic status, and I went to elementary, middle school, and high school there. Wow. All within that 5 mile radius from my home. I remember the helicopters flying overnight sometimes looking, for a suspect. I remember the police cars coming up and down the street. I remember being, I think 9 or 10 years old, and someone forcibly trying to break into our home through the garage, but luckily we had burglar bars on the window in my mom's room, right? Yeah. I remember these stories vividly, but yet I'm not a byproduct of my community. And now, so East Tampa, you look at Drew Park, you look at, areas out in East County that, to your point, have not changed in decades, right? But now, knowing the experience that I bring to the table, the network that I have behind me, the supporters I have at a county-wide level, I love that, because I can look at all issues within this county, not just within the district. I want to be able to bring all the stakeholders, right, all of the community leaders to the table, because one thing I love to say, and I truly and I firmly believe this, is that you don't have to be a subject matter expert in one area. That does not make a successful elected official. It doesn't make a successful leader. What makes a successful leader is being able to bring multiple individuals to the table to delegate and to lead. Right, and so that's what I'm most excited
and hold people
about.
accountable too.
And you hold them accountable,
because when I worked for Senator Rubio's office, I mean, there was a project that I took on that really had nothing to do with the federal office. Yeah. I mean, in any way, shape, or form. But there were people in our community that needed help, and they were not getting the response that they should have been getting from our county government. And when they approached me and said, you know, is there anything the senator can do? And I said, well, there's nothing the senator can do specifically, but as an office, we can certainly kind of put some pressure on the powers that be and see what we can, you know, see if we can shake the tree hard enough to get some things done. And we did. You know, we got everybody into a room and said, okay, why is this happening? And sure enough, that community started to change immediately. Why? Because we were holding them accountable. Yes. And they knew that people were watching them and holding them accountable.
That's right. The Office of County Commissioner holds a great deal of influence within the county, and even I would argue at the state level. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, our office is able to delegate, to able to reach out, pick up the phone, and connect you with the right resources. And so, what I love and what I bring is that my candidacy, and even once I'm elected, will always have transparency and accountability. It's going to remain the cornerstone throughout. And that's one thing that we need to bring back. And not only just politics, but but just in your life and your lifestyle, right? Mm-hmm. And you look at the county commission has gone through very turbulent times over the past few years, but it's time to bring in a candidate. It's time to bring common sense back to the county commission.
Because for instance, you know, with the recent shooting that we had in Ybor City, as unfortunate as it is, and as tragic as it was, the response made no sense. The proposals that have come out of it make no sense.
The 1 a.m. curfew.
It's like,
the business.
What is that going to do other than hurt businesses? Yeah. You know, especially when at a time when Ybor, in now our recent history, has been successful, and people are moving into the area, and businesses all times of the day are flourishing. Mm-hmm. You know, now you're going to go ahead and kind of, you know, you're going to put one hand behind their back, you know, because of, you know, some things that you can't control. Yes. You know, because again, there were 50 police officers on site.
Yeah, there were over 50 police officers present. Here's my thing. When something like that tragically happens, and you have to be able to say, okay, now let's bring in our local officials. Let's bring in the state attorney. Let's bring in the chief of police. Let's bring in those local businesses, right, on that strip or throughout Ybor. And let's all have a round table. Let's brainstorm. Let's figure out what is the best way moving forward. But to sit here and almost, I would just say, condemn the businesses, really. Yeah. I mean, that's not the proper way to go.
Well, not only that, but also the other solution was to reopen 7th Avenue for traffic. Yeah. What is that going to have? What impact does that have on an altercation between a group of individuals? You know, okay, so what? Because you're relegated to the sidewalk, all of a sudden you're not going to fight? Yeah. You know, and again, on one of the busiest weekends of the year in Ybor City, you know, so again, it's oftentimes, it does seem like what's lacking in our local government, or all government really, top down, is common sense.
That's it. And unfortunately, it doesn't, you know, from the highest levels, it just does not trickle down effectively. But back to, you know, just the platform points, right? And to your point of, you know, what is it that I can do at the county level? It's really being able to focus in on areas throughout the county that need, you know, development, and knowing that all areas in Hillsborough County aren't the same. The needs of Tampa aren't the same needs of East County, Plant City. Definitely aren't the needs of Carrollwood, Lutz, right? And so, and one hot topic, and we'll, you know, just to kind of go back, you know, into what we can do getting into office. Look at the $500+ million that are being held right now, you know, Department of Revenue in an escrow account. You know, that was taken from the transportation tax, the penny tax. Yep. And that money is now being held in an account, but it's not being implemented here at the county level. That's unacceptable. Right. that money should be here for infrastructure, for transportation. You look at that, we have a 22 fire station deficit throughout Hillsborough County.
Wow.
It's unacceptable.
Yeah.
The money has been misused in areas where it probably shouldn't have been, and that now we have paid, right? All of us have paid enough taxes and impact fees and et cetera to be able to fund those stations, but we don't have them now. And that directly affects homeowner insurance and property insurance because of that.
Well, and the problem is that when the economy has been good and prosperous is when our elected officials have gotten greedy.
Yes.
And all of a sudden you see all these little pet projects popping up instead of investing again in the communities and the parts of our community that need it most, right? Because truly, I mean, we are merely separated by streets. I mean, as a county, we're just a culmination of streets. So what divides East Tampa from West Tampa? A street.
Yes.
And so, those are the opportunities where, again, rising tide lifts all boats. Mm-hmm. And the prosperous times are when we should be investing in the communities that need it most. But again, it seems that when those times come, it's often when, again, all of a sudden new parks are popping up and, all these little kind of pet projects, that, again, were they really necessary, and then when you go and ask for the money where it is necessary, they're like, oh, well, there is no money for that.
Correct. Yeah. And we find ourselves robbing Peter to pay Paul, just to cover things like transportation, just to cover things like, building a new fire station. Right?
Well, notoriously, I mean, the county has far exceeded, their reach in terms of the monies that came from Raymond James Stadium. I believe that we've spent those monies now years in advance, to the point where it's almost irrelevant now. Like it's almost as if that money doesn't even exist because they've tapped those coffers so far into the future, that the money that the revenue that the stadium generates, I mean, almost, is already spent.
Oh, it's been already spent for you. And out of that, so the stadium, majority of it was able to be financed for through a community investment tax.
Right.
That was implemented back in '96, if I'm not mistaken. And from there, it's actually going to sunset in 2026, while I'm in office. And so people have asked, well, hey, what are you looking at, that tax, right? Mm-hmm. That is a tax that is to go for development like the Raymond James Stadium. That's supposed to go for things like parks, rec, fire, et cetera. But unfortunately, right, those monies were, I think, like you said, pet projects and certain things that didn't have an impact for the greater good, and more so just for a local area or for a local entity.
Yeah.
And so, back to your point about pet projects, we have on the county commission, there's 4 district appropriated seats, right? And I understand why a commissioner would have, maybe my pet project, my area of focus, because this is my district. I want to bring money to my district. Mm-hmm. It's just like Congress. That's perfectly fine. Okay. But then when you get to the countywide level, it's, we need to look at efficacy reports. We need to look at the greater impact. If we shouldn't be focusing, if we have great urbanization, great development already happening at a particular area in the county, then let's look at maybe an area that's not, so, as prosperous or thriving. Let's look at putting resources there. And so it just takes someone, actually listening, to the advisors, listening to the community, to the stakeholders, to be able to give everyone a good representation.
Well, again, I mean, looking at Hillsborough County right now, like you mentioned, the Carrollwood Lutz area, they're doing fine. Downtown is doing fine. South Tampa, great. Southern Hillsborough County, also great. I mean, almost, to a detriment because it's growing so fast, that it's outgrowing the infrastructure.
It has.
Which obviously is also a challenge for the county.
Yes.
But again, that should provide the breathing room to say, hey, let's kind of go back to the core of our county and improve that.
Yes.
Because they all talk about wanting people to move back closer to the city to reduce traffic and to improve mass transit and all this kind of stuff. Well, why aren't people moving back towards the city? Well, because some of those areas need a lot of work. And if you don't fix up those areas, well, guess what? People aren't going to move back into those areas.
That's right.
And some of those areas, again, have roads, have infrastructure that hasn't been touched in multiple generations.
Yeah. They, A, need a lot of work, and B, the cost of living is just exponential. It's through the roof. People can afford it. And then a lot of that just comes back down to transportation, right? How are we going to move throughout the city, right? I mean, unfortunately, Tampa, Hillsborough County, right, was not really built with the forward thinking of, this economic boom in mind, right? We don't. Unfortunately, we don't have subways. We can't do subways here,
right.
in Florida. So it's looking at things like possibly light rail, looking at a bus system, right? Looking at things that are effective, right? You look at HART, for example, the Hillsborough area regional transit, but primarily focuses just on the Tampa area. Right?
Well, and I've talked to city council members because they're obviously obsessed with, a train, light rail, that sort of thing. And I come from Miami where we had one of those or have one of those. And again, going back to common sense, do you know how long it took them to connect their light rail system to the airport?
Oh, gosh. No. How long?
It took them 35 years.
Wow.
And to me, that's like, well, shouldn't that have been where you start?
Yeah.
Not where you finish?
Yes.
And all that to say that eventually they started tapping in rough times. They tapped into the coffers for that system. And now it still barely services the entire county. It doesn't service the entire county. Yeah. And so there needs to be accountability, for a system like that. But my point is that when they start talking about those types of mass transit projects, they always talk about the city. And it's like the city doesn't need it. If I live in South Tampa, I don't need a light rail system to get me into downtown. If I live in Apollo Beach, or if I live in Plant City, or if I live in, even up in USF, that's where I need it. Because that's the person that's driving 20, 30 minutes every day to commute.
Yeah. 2/3 of our residents live in unincorporated Hillsborough, meaning they live outside of Tampa, Temple Terrace, or Plant City, right? How do we service those areas effectively? And a significant amount of the citizens who work in Hillsborough County travel from outside of county lines. They're coming from Pinellas across the Howard, Franklin, and Gandy. They're coming south, right, from Pasco. Yeah. They're coming over, traveling west out, from Polk. So looking at a regional approach for transportation.
Well, and I've told them, I go, if like you said, if it doesn't make sense, it's like the opposition to a lot of these projects hasn't been partisan as much as it has been in opposition to the fact that it doesn't make sense.
That's what it comes down to.
If it makes sense, people are going to get behind it, regardless of political ideology.
Yes.
But the problem is that the proposals that have come, out of the city and out of the county don't make sense.
They don't make sense.
And so, until it makes sense, we're going to continue to have these problems.
And it's finally showing now. I mean, the Band-Aid was ripped off during COVID. Right? Mm-hmm. We had been doing the status quo rubber stamping of politics for decades, and then COVID really exposed what was happening, and a lot of what the failing infrastructure that we had, the foundation, which is withering away from housing, from transportation, public safety services, parks and recs, fire, you name it, and you go, well, man, okay. Where was all this? Right? It all came unexposed. So now we are facing, a crucial time right now where Tampa is on the precipice of such greatness.
Yeah.
But if we don't have the right elected officials, right, not Tampa, but just Hillsborough County is a Tampa Bay region. If we don't have the right elected officials, I think it can all go.
And we have to take advantage of the fact that we are one of the few regions, I would say even nationally, that are prospering, even though economically, nationally, we are struggling. And the fact that so many people are moving here, we need to take advantage of the fact that, again, property values are rising, revenue is going to continue to increase, and do the things that need to be done and make the hard decisions now while we have the resources to do it.
That's right.
Rather than waiting until those resources are gone and being like, oh man, well, we don't have the money to do it now.
Over 1,000 people a day are moving to Florida, and a good majority of them are coming to the Tampa Bay region.
Absolutely.
And so it takes people at your county level, it takes your local city councilmen, elected officials to have a great relationship, right, up and downstream with your state elected officials, representatives, with your state senators, right? And it takes that. We've never had that before in the county commission, but now we do with the current county commission, and it's going to continue to grow and strengthen those relationships. And so I'm proud to say that I'm building the coalition of community leaders. We've secured the endorsement of Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, Sheriff Chad Cronister. We just secured former Attorney General Pam Bondi.
That's phenomenal.
Week, which was just phenomenal. Representative Bernie Jock, and many more to come.
Which, for those again who may not know, former Attorney General Pam Bondi lives here in Tampa.
Yes,
so that's why. I mean, if some people are like, why would it's she lives in South Tampa. Right. She both reaps the benefits and also suffers the consequences of Hillsborough County politics and Hillsborough County Commission.
She knows it hands out.
Yeah.
And so maybe a month ago, we dropped with our first quarterly reporting. We had outraised every candidate, Republican and Democrat combined.
Phenomenal.
And so, as a first-time candidate, that is completely unprecedented, right?
Yeah.
But it's about keeping that momentum, continuing to drive forward, and continuing what I'm doing right now, the work with getting out into the community, knowing the issues, meeting people, and continuing to fundraise.
Well, and I don't think we've capitalized enough. I mean, you just mentioned Pam Bondi, but we haven't capitalized enough on how much of the state leadership, both past and present, are from this area. I mean, the governor's from Dunedin.
Yeah.
And Ashley Moody's from Plant City.
That's right.
We need to capitalize on those relationships and that personal investment. I mean, the Moody's, again, are still a large influence in Plant City and in the county in general. And we need to leverage those relationships also at the state level, which people don't realize needs to be done, to make sure that the state legislature is also investing in Tampa Bay.
That's right. And a lot of people tend to forget about Plant City and East County.
That's right.
Unfortunately. And that's what it's about. You look at my calendar right now, you go, oh my God, what the heck? I'm everywhere, all over the county, every day. And one thing that I stand firm and that I will continue to do is, even once I'm elected, I'm going to be on a rotating basis, going throughout Republican club meetings, going out to civic associations, just getting out there into the community, people to know that, hey, I'm championing your issues and I'm working for you day in, day out. Well,
that's a perfect transition to kind of close this out. I'm going to have, of course, all of your contact information in the description of this video. But please go ahead and share with us anyways, for those who may be listening to the podcast, how they can get a hold of you, how they can make donations, how they can join the campaign.
Yes. So Rico Smith, again, running for Hillsborough County Commission, District 6.
If you want to talk to the camera, the little one right there.
Little one right there, District 6, county-wide. So the primary election is August 20th of 2024, so next year. So we've got quite a bit of runway ahead of us.
Good.
And then the general election is November 5th, 2024, where I'm going against the Democrat, primary winner. And so please visit my website, www.vote.ricosmith.com. There you see our campaign video, our endorsements, the link to donate as well. Again, please reach out at any time, and there you can actually put in your contact information. And one thing I love to say, I love keeping my phone number out. So, I'm not someone who shies away from it. 813-600-5605.
Perfect.
So please, you can reach out anytime. And it's about being a candidate, an elected official who is accessible.
Yeah.
All right. One thing that we don't see much of these days, someone who's accessible and actually cares about the community.
Well, and again, I would say, because it's oftentimes the hardest organizations to tap into, are the non-political ones, right? But I would imagine HOA meetings, any kind of neighborhood organizations, because, the political clubs are always going to invite you to come and speak and that sort of thing. But, it's really the community level organizations that I think, make the most impact, because you meet the people who maybe are not as politically engaged, but obviously have a lot of stake in the game. And so if you happen to have a community organization that you're a part of, please reach out to Rico and invite him to, max out his calendar.
Yes, further. I would love that.
Yeah.
And I love to finish it off that it's time to bring sound leadership, good policies, and thriving communities back to Hillsborough County.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you. It's definitely not going to be the last time, before come August. We'll definitely have you back for an update and to see how things are going, but we appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thank you again.
All right.
Alrighty. Have a good one.